Welcome to the first of my Microsoft Access Forms Masterclasses. In this first Masterclass, I'm going to show you how to build a set of custom navigation buttons like these that you can add onto any Access form. The reason that I'm building these is because although a form comes with its own set of built-in navigation buttons, I find that particularly on modern high-resolution computer screens, they're very small, a little bit difficult to see, a little bit difficult to use, and I find that some users don't even know what they're for. So a set of clearly labeled buttons are a very useful tool to add onto any form. I'm working here in Access 2010, but what we're going to do applies equally to version 2007 or 2013. So I'm just going to switch into another copy of the database that doesn't have those buttons yet, and we'll get started. Okay, here I am with a form that doesn't yet have a set of buttons, and the first thing I need to do is put the form into design view. So I'm going to the Home tab and choosing design view, and I need to decide where on the form I'm going to put my buttons. Now they'll work wherever I put them, but I like to put command buttons like this onto the footer of the form. The reason being that the footer is always on view in the lower edge of the form's window, so even if the form is too big to be accommodated by the window, the user doesn't have to scroll down to find the buttons. A footer isn't shown by default, so you have to ask for it. So all you need to do is to right-click somewhere on the detail area, the background of the form, and choose Form Header Footer. And you'll see that you get both a header and a footer. I don't need a form header at the moment, so I'm going to reduce its height to 0 just to hide it from view. To do that, I'm pointing at the upper edge of this bar labeled detail. I'm just going to drag it right up to the top to remove the form header. If I need to bring the header back for any reason, I can just reverse that process, or I can select the header and go to the property sheet. Now, if that's not open at the moment, I can click the property sheet button on the ribbon and change the height property to whatever I want, for example 2. Or alternatively, I could drag the detail bar up or down as I did before. So here in the form footer is where I'm going to put my set of buttons. So I'm going to use the button tool from the controls section of the design tab. Now, because I don't need to use the wizard, I've got my control wizards switched off. Down here, you'll see that the use control wizards option is not selected, so I won't have the wizard start up. If you're doing this and the wizard starts, then you just need to cancel it. So I'm going to click on the button tool and click somewhere in the footer. It doesn't matter exactly where at the moment. And I get a button that is automatically named and captioned by Access. It's called it Command 22 and given it the caption Command 22. Now, you can move items about and resize them and even type the caption directly on the form itself. So you can use these handles around the edge of a button to resize it and this grey dot to move it. But I prefer to do all those things from the property sheet. If the property sheet isn't already open, as mine is, you can either switch it on here from the property sheet button on the ribbon, or you can right click on the item and ask for its properties, and make sure that it's selected so that you're looking at the properties of the item that you intend to work on. First thing I'm going to do is go to the other tab and change its name. It's called Command 22. I'll click here and change that to CMD back, because this is going to be the back button. I'll go to the Format tab and change its caption to a back-facing arrow followed by the word back. And I also want now to change its size and position. I want its width to be 3. I'm working in centimeters. I don't need to type cm here for centimeters, and similarly if you're working in inches, type the appropriate number that you want, and you don't have to type inches. It will assume that's what you mean. So a width of 3. As I move to the next item, you'll notice that the button has actually already changed shape. A height of 1. I want it to be 0.5 of a centimeter from the top of the footer, so I'm going to type in 0.5 here. And finally, I want its left position to be 1. And so I've got a correctly named and captioned button here with the position and size just as I want it. I need 2 more buttons. So what I'm going to do, instead of drawing 2 buttons, is make sure that this one is selected by clicking on it. And I'm going to copy. I'm using the keyboard, but you can do right-click copy if you like, or copy and paste from the Home tab. I'm going to copy and paste twice. Once, twice. So I'm going to move the buttons to the positions that I want them in. So this one is going to be my next button. So I'm going to change its name to CMD Next. Its Format tab, I'm going to type Next, followed by a right-facing arrow. Its height and width are correct, but I need to make its top property 0.5 and its left property 4, because I want it to the right of my back button. And finally, for the new button, its name, CMD New, and its caption, New, and again, top 0.5 and left 7. So those are my 3 buttons. You'll notice that the footer section expanded to accommodate the pasted buttons. I can very simply return that to the original size by changing its height property to 2. Okay, so I've got 3 buttons here. I also want to add some tooltips to them. It's called a control tip when you're working here in Access. So I'm going to click on my back button and I'll go to the Other tab, and there's a property called Control Tip Text. And in there I'm going to type Go to Previous Record. And for the next button, go to Next Record. And for that new button, Create New Record. Okay, now I'm going to go and check those buttons out in Form View to see what they look like. I like the size of them. I like their placement. If I point at them, I'm getting the tooltips. But of course nothing happens yet. So we'll sort out the code in a moment. But there's one more thing here. If I click on the back button, for example, and use my tab key, because a lot of users navigate around forms using their tab key, if I press tab, you'd expect to go to the next button, but in fact it jumps to the new button and then it goes back to next. And the reason for that is that the tab order that Access creates depends upon the order in which items were added to the form, and that's the order in which I drew those buttons. So I just need to correct that. So I'll go back into Design View. Now each part of a form has its own tab order. So if I right click on the form footer and ask for tab order, you'll notice that it says here back, new, next, and I want it to be back, next, new. If I press auto order, it will do it for me, but I'll show you how to do it manually. I'll select the next item and drag it up into the position that I want, and then OK. I'll go back into form view here. If I now select my back button and click tab, it moves through the buttons in the order that I wanted. Now the example that I showed you also had a first and a last button on it, but I'm not going to put those buttons on just yet, because you might find that you only want these 3 buttons. I tend only to use these 3 buttons, but some people like all of them, so I'll add those in a little while. But first of all, I'll show you how to code these buttons. So in order to do that, I need to go back into my design view, and we need to add some code to these buttons that will make them work. So I'll select the button that I'm interested in, which is the back button. We're going to write what is called an event procedure. Now, an event procedure is a VBA macro that works by itself when a particular event takes place. It's called an event procedure for that reason. And we have an event tab on the properties that show you all the possible events that you can add code to for the selected item. And for a button, the one that we're interested in is the on-click event. So I'll just click there to put my cursor in this text box. I'm going to click this button that has 3 dots on it. It's called the build button. And I'm going to choose the code builder and click OK. And that's taken me into the Visual Basic Editor, where it's already created an empty event procedure for the command back_click event. It starts with private sub, it finishes with end sub, and our cursor is already in the middle there. I'm going to press tab to indent my code, and I'm just going to type the single line of code that I need here. We use a method which is called doCmd, D-O-C-M-D. I'm typing a dot to get a list of all the things that I can type, and I know that I want go to record. All I need to do here is to start typing. If I type a G, it takes me all the way down to things beginning with G rather. I want go to record, double clicked it. I'm going to type a space so that it shows me the parameters that are needed. So this horizontal bar here shows me the parameters that it needs to do its job. It's already showing me in bold the one that it wants now, which is object type, and it's given me a list of possible object types. This means what type of object contains the record that I want to go to. But I'm thinking about the current object, so I don't need to tell it anything. I could tell it AC data form, as you can see there, but I'm not going to bother to do that because it will assume current object if I don't tell it otherwise. So I'm going to type a comma to move on to the next parameter, which is object name. Now I don't need to give it that either, because again it will assume the current object. So another comma, and this time I do need to give it that information, which specific record do I want to go to, and I need to go to the previous record, so I'm giving it AC previous. Double click on that. Okay. Now I need to code the next 2 buttons. I don't need to go back into form view to do that, form design view to do that, because I can do it from here. This left-hand drop-down list gives me a list of all the objects on the form, and here we are. There's the new and the next button. The reason the new comes before next here, because they're simply in alphabetical order. So command new. As before, do command dot go to record space comma comma AC new rec, and finally next, do command dot go to record space comma comma AC next. Now I've actually purposely neglected entering something else there because I want to show you something that could potentially go wrong. Now we'll check our code by going to debug and compile. That's quite an important step before you test your code, because you really ought to test your code before you run it for real. So that does a final check on your code. Save, in case your code were to crash. It could possibly crash access. If it did crash access, then you've just saved, so you're not going to lose anything. Let's go back into Access and switch our form into Form View. I'll just do something that I know can't go wrong, and that's go to a new record. Okay, that's fine. Our button now works. How about going back a step? That's fine. We've gone back. Can we go next? Yes, it just takes us to a new record. What if we go next again when we're on a new record? We get an error. And you similarly would have got an error if you were on the first record and clicked the back button. So what we need to do is somehow deal with that error should it occur. If I click the debug button, it just takes us to where that code is that it cannot execute. It can't execute the go to next record code, and it's currently in break mode. It says it up here at the top of the window. Your code is trying to run and it can't, so it's paused at the moment. So you must take it out of break mode by clicking the reset button here. Okay, don't try and write code, do anything else whilst you've got a yellow bar there. So simply all we need to do is add what is called an error handler to our code. It's very easy to do. I'm going to click just here to place a new empty line above my existing line of code, and I'm going to type on error resume next. The error handler must always be the first thing in a particular procedure, and it tells Access what to do should an error occur. And this particular error handler is a very simple one, which just says if you get an error, ignore it, move on to the next thing. Now you should use that with caution, obviously, but because we only have one command here, if that command can't be executed, it's not going to produce a particular problem with any subsequent commands. So there we are, on error resume next. And you can see that I typed in lowercase. When I move out of a particular code statement, having typed it in lowercase, if what needs to be in uppercase pops into uppercase, I can see that I haven't made a typo there. Now to save typing, I'm just going to select that line of text. I'm going to copy it and paste it into each new line there. So I've now got an error handler in each of those procedures. Let's go back to Access and check it out. So we're here on the new record. What happens if I click the next button? No problem. Already on a new record, ask for a new record, no problem. Go to the first record and click the back button, no problem. So we've created some useful working buttons there that I can use to move forwards or backwards through the record set or go to a new record. Okay, you could leave it at that if you want, but I'm now going to add a first and last button in case you want to have a complete set of buttons here. So back into Design View. Now I need to make space for these buttons here, so I'm going to take my new button and move it along 2 button spaces. So that's got to move 6 centimeters to the right. On the Format tab, I'm changing the left property to 13. The next button needs to move 3 centimeters to the right, so I'm changing that from 4 to 7. And the back button needs to go 3 centimeters to the right, so its left property is going to change from 1 to 4. Now I've made spaces for my new buttons, and I'm going to do what I did before, which is copy and paste 2 new buttons. This one I shall make my first button, so I'll change its caption from back to first, and I'm going to have 2 left arrows there just to distinguish it from the back button, and the word first, and its other property, the name property, is going to be CMD first. And on the format tab, again, its width and height are already correct. Its top is going to be 0.5 and its left is going to be 1. My other copy I'm going to make to the last button, so change its caption to the word last, followed by 2 right facing arrows. Its name, CMD last. Its top 0.5 and its left is going to be 10. I'm going to make the background of the footer 2 centimeters high, because again it expanded to accommodate the copies. And I'm just going to modify the tab order. This time I'm going to use the auto order. There we go, first, back, next, last, new, which is correct. Click OK then. Okay, I need some code for these, so I can do it as I did before. So first button, I want the on-click event, and what you can do here in code, if you like, is to copy and paste code and change it as appropriate. So I can change AC previous to AC first. Notice I've typed it in lowercase. If I click somewhere else, it pops into uppercase, showing me that it was happy with that. And my last button, I can paste again. And I'm going to change previous to last. Let's check that. Yep. And again, debug, compile, save. Here I am in Access again. Now I just want to add some tooltips to those on the other tab, because remember, when you copy an object, it copies all its properties, including the control tip text. That says go to previous record. I want to change that to go to first record, and this one go to last record. Okay, let's go and check them out. We're already on the first record. Can't go back, can't go to the first, so we're not getting an error. We can go to the next record, the last one, a new one. We can go back and we can go to the first. Now we're on the first record, but the first and back buttons, although they're of no use here, are still enabled, so there's little point in that. What would be nice is if we could disable those buttons so that they weren't tempting the user to click them. I'll show you what I mean by switching into another copy of this form where that has already been done. Okay, here I am in a ready-made copy of the form that's already got those buttons enabled. Now we're on record 140, so all the records are enabled. If I go back, fine, they're still all enabled, but what if I went to the first record? When I went there, both the first button and the back button are disabled. Now, we've got an error handler, so we won't get an error if those were clicked, but we've also disabled them so that the user knows that it's pointless trying to click them, and also it helps them know where they are. If we go to the last record, both the next button and the last button are disabled because we're already on the last record and there's no next record to go to. If we go to a new record, the new button is disabled as well as the next button, but we can go to the last record. And if we just move back a few records, everything gets enabled again. So that's quite a simple thing to do. We need to write a bit of code to do that. So let's switch back to our form that we're working in and do that. Okay, here I am in the form that we're working on. I'll take it back into design view here. Now, I need some code that will check which record we're on and modify the buttons by enabling all them or disabling them as appropriate. And there is an event that happens when the user moves from record to record or creates a new record. It also happens when the form opens and displays a record, and that's called the current event. So we can make use of that event to hold some code that will check which record we're on. So I need to select the form itself. You can do that by selecting this little rectangle that's between the two rulers at the top here. Or you can go to the property sheet and choose form from this drop-down list here to make sure that that is what is selected. On the event tab, we need the onCurrent event. So I'm going to go to the code builder. And here we are with a form current event procedure all ready for our code. And what I'm going to do is to write a series of if statements. Now, the if statements are going to decide what to do depending upon which record is currently showing. As before, I'm going to start off with a simple error handler. And an if statement starts off with a condition, if, and I'm going to use the current record property of the form. Now, current record returns the index number of the record that's currently being shown. In other words, what position is that record in the record set? So if we're on the first record, the index number is 1. If we're on the 100th record, it's 100, and so on. If we're on the last record, it's the same as the total number of records in the record set, which we can also ascertain, as you'll see in a minute. I'm going to use the word me to refer to the form itself. Me refers to the current object. Current record equals 1. So that's asking, is the current record record number 1? Then. So that's the first line of my if statement. New line, tab in. What am I going to do? Well, I need to disable the back button and the first button, but we don't have a disabled property. We have an enabled property that we set to false. Me dot command back dot enabled equals false. And notice that as I'm typing, I'm not typing the whole thing. I don't need to. I just need to get to the appropriate thing and then either type the next item or type a space or a tab or whatever, and it all gets filled in for me. Me dot command first dot enabled equals false. So enabled equals false means it's disabled. That's what we do if we're on record number 1. But what if we're not on record number 1? Where if we're on anything else, we want it enabled, in other words, enabled equals true. So the second part of the if statement is else, and those two again, me dot command back dot enabled equals true. Me dot command first dot enabled equals true. That's the end of my if statement, so we type end if. So we've dealt with what happens on the first record. Well, what if we're on the last record? How can I tell if I'm on my last record? Well, if I'm on the last record, the index number of my record, in other words, what is returned by current record, would be the same as what would be returned by the record count property. So my if statement this time is going to be if me dot current record is equal to me dot, I'm going to type record set, and this is the record set that is in the current form, dot. Now I'm not getting a list here. This doesn't always mean that you're wrong if you don't get a list, but it means that it could show you a number of possible lists and it doesn't know which one to show you, so you need to know what to type here. And I'm going to type record count, which I can assure you is correct. Then new line. So what are we going to do for on the last record? We just simply disable the last button. Me dot command last dot enabled equals false, else me dot command last dot enabled equals true, and if. Okay, I need another if statement to take account of the command next button. Now you might wonder, why didn't I put it in the if statement that I just used there? And that's because you can use the next button on the last record to give you a new record. I don't want to do that, so I've written a different if statement for that. And this time it's similar to the one I've just used, if me dot current record, but this time I'm going to say is greater than or equal to, because when you're on a new record, the current record property actually returns a value which is one greater than the total number of records in the record set. So it will also know that if it's greater than the record count, that you're actually on a new record. Me dot record set dot record count, then new line, me dot command next dot enabled equals false, else me dot command next dot enabled equals true, and if. And finally, we need to deal with the new button. If me dot new record. So if new record is true, then we know that we're on a new record. We don't have to type equals true here because it assumes that. Then me dot command new dot enabled equals false, else Sorry, I hit the wrong key then. Me dot command new dot enable equals true. End if. Okay. Just have a look through, check your typing, debug, compile, there's another check, save, very important, back into Access, and let's check these out. There we are. So the form opened, so the current event took place, and immediately it disabled the two first and back buttons. If we go to the next button, there we are, we've got first and back become enabled. If we go to the last button, last becomes disabled as well as next. If we go to a new button, new and next become disabled, but last is enabled. We can move to the last button, last and next are disabled, and so on. Move back and they're all enabled. So that's all working correctly. Just one finishing touch. Now that I've created all my buttons, I've added my code, I've tested them, I want to get rid of this built-in navigation bar. There's one thing that I'll lose if I do that, and that's the record counter. And in the next masterclass, I'll show you how to create one of your own. But here's how to get rid of it if you don't need it. Into Design View. Make sure the form itself is selected so you can check out its properties. And on the Format tab of the form, navigation buttons down here, we can just change yes to no. And back into Form View, and there we are with our new set of buttons. We've got rid of the ones that we didn't need, and we can navigate through our records. Okay, that's the end of this masterclass. You might want to take a look at my next masterclass, in which I'll build a simple record counter that can sit alongside these buttons and replace the one that we just got rid of. If you want to check out my website, www.fontstuff.com, you'll find a complete step-by-step written guide to this masterclass, as well as sample files and handouts that you can download.